Today we are welcoming two very special guests, Clementina Gentile Woo! and Daniel Baesler. Clementina is a service designer from Digital Vlaanderen, and Daniel is a design chapter lead at Meetup. And the common topic today is language and design. I will stop talking now and I will give the floor to our speakers. But if you have any questions during the talk, we have a Q&A session at the end of each talk, so don't be afraid to raise your hand and we'll give you the mic. And I hope you enjoy. So we will now give a warm welcome to Clementina.
Thanks for inviting me. So I prepared this talk for a conference years ago, but I still find it very relevant, and it's basically my two passions, poetry and design, coming together. So I'm always very happy to give this talk. So it all started was 22nd of March 2016. Brussels had a couple of terrorist attacks, and the city looked a bit like this, like a siege. There were military in the street. It was really daunting. Not so long after, 16th of June, I thought something that would be always against the odds actually happened. UK voted to leave the EU. Bear with me, I'm gonna get to the point at a certain point. And 9th of November 2016, Trump was elected as president of the United States for the first time. So after this series of events, I was completely desperate. I thought, I actually don't believe anymore in humanity. What is happening in this world? And I tried to kind of make sense of what was happening. And I started actually leaving poems in public transport, because I thought that was my way to deal with what was happening. And I just wanted people to change a little bit their view on that day or have a different perspective just for a couple of seconds. And being a designer, I even did prototypes. So at the beginning, I was just leaving a white piece of paper, but people thought it was a grocery list, so they weren't really reading it. And then I thought, postcards. Everybody's curious to read other people's postcards. So I started leaving postcards in public transport, like here on the train. But then I went a bit further and I said, where does it come, this passion I have for poetry? What can I understand? How can I use it also for other domains of my life, like design? And then I stumbled in this book called The Uprising, a very specific and interesting book that talks about the link between language and finance. Now, you would say, what do they have to do with each other? Basically, what the book says is that, a bit like financial models, also language became more and more compatible with digital financial formats. So effective, we talk in tweets, so in a reduced amount of space, we use a lot of acronyms, we reduced the language to be more effective. But by doing that, we are depriving the language from meaning. And so the whole book was about the fact that we need more poetry to expand the language, to use the language at its fullest. And then I thought, okay, I'm a designer, and actually I see the same thing happening in the design world. I see a lot of optimization, becoming more efficient, becoming faster, building faster. And it's something that, of course, has its benefit, but is also sometimes scary because it has also other sort of consequences. And so I started reasoning that at both levels, at the level of the product, so what we ship to our clients or to our organizations, we more and more work on interfaces that promote fast exchanges and also that have people do things in the most efficient possible way. And at the level of the process, so our own design process, we are also there more and more inclined to move fast, break things, try stuff even if you know that they don't necessarily work, but just for the sake of trying and learning at any cost. This is a quote that I also liked a lot and that made me also think a lot back then. For a profession in which the purpose is allegedly transformative problem solving, design solutions are incredibly conservative. We continue to populate the world with junk and have become complicit in designing people into a culture of convenience. And then I started thinking, okay, let's put everything together and let's start thinking, what can we learn from poetry that can help us in the design practice? And the first thing I thought was hindrance. Poems are very difficult. It takes always more time to read a poem, or you really need to be in the right, open mindset, because it takes effort. And as designers, we are taught a bit otherwise. We are taught that we need to build stuff that don't make people think, because everything needs to be super intuitive and easy to use. But I wonder if sometimes we need to actually make people think, and make people think about what they're doing. This is an example, but I could give millions. This was an app used in Texas to report suspicious people. Now, everybody started reporting, yeah, I see this person in the street, just because he was black, he was suspicious. And by the way the app was designed, it allowed all this sort of unnecessary profiling, basically. And in the second iteration of the app, they added an extra field, so an extra step, where people needed to specify why the person was suspicious. And that was, of course, not enough saying he's black, So by adding hindrance, by adding an extra step, they made actually the app more meaningful and less profiling. This is another example that I found on Twitter. So basically, Strava tags automatically another person that you cross during your run, and tags it along in your social media via Strava. But of course, what you can do by doing that is basically you can access also the Strava profile of the other person. You can see where she runs, where she lives, and that is also very problematic. So also here, instead of thinking, how can we make it difficult to access other people's private, data, they just thought, it's so easy if you can just automatically tag someone along when you run together. So I started thinking, when should we do this? Of course, you can't do it all the time. You can't always have extra steps or hindrances. But I think in certain situations, like to protect user data and safety, like we were saying before, to limit digital addiction, for example, or any sort of addiction, or to nudge positive behavior or discourage harmful behavior. I think these are moments in which we would possibly try to use more hindrance in our design interfaces. But then I also started reflecting about the design process, and there also, how can we add more hindrance to our design process, and what does that mean? And then I immediately had to think about design ops. I know that it's like a hype, and everybody's very much into design ops. And again, it has these wonderful benefits. But when I read also the definition in the Nielsen and Norman group, design ops refers to the orchestration and optimization of people, processes, and craft in order to amplify design value and impact at scale. And I stopped a bit on the impact aspect, because I thought, okay, if you indeed optimize and you streamline your processes, is because you want to measure the impact that you have, and you want to be able to say, okay, if we have so many components, or if we have a design system that is so structured, we save so many hours, or we increase so many amount of, revenues, whatever. And so I started also there thinking, yeah, but what is the type of impact that we normally measure? And most of the time is on two levels. One level is user experience, so how much easier it's to complete a task, for example, how much easier it is to buy something, and also in terms of profit, cost, and revenues. But also there, what we could do maybe is take a step back and think what are other elements that we could add to that impact assessment to make it more systemic and holistic. So how can we measure, for example, the social impact of the things we built? In the case of the app we saw before, how can we manage the impact it has on people that gets normally discriminated? And also, of course, on an ecological level or sustainable level, how can we measure the impacts of the products and services we built on an environmental scale? So the resources we use and the waste that we produce. The second aspect that I love about poetry is the openness. Here I have the quote, of interpretation is an infinite slippage of a transition from signifier to signified, which is to say basically that everyone reads a poem, but they interpret it in a very different way, because a poem has a very open way of being interpreted. And I wonder whether we could also use this principle in our design products. When I was doing research about openness, I discovered actually that when the English Parliament got bombed after the Second World War, Churchill was absolutely fixated on having it rebuilt in the same exact way. So no, for example, an amphitheater kind of shape, more round, but exactly like this in a square with two kind of aisles opposed to each other. Because he thought that this shape actually influenced the two-party political system that in UK is actually standing in place right now, and actually literally said we shape our buildings and afterwards our buildings shape us. And I thought that was really interesting aspect also that can apply to some of the products we design. When Siri was designed in the first place, it was designed always to make jokes and reply with jokes when she didn't know what to answer. But when people started using it also for more critical or problematic situation like sexual assault, Siri was just replying with jokes. Because the interpretation that you would give was not open enough. And afterwards, they actually changed the application, and they provide also a link to a crisis intervention center. But at the beginning, the way they designed Siri was not open enough to allow these sort of interpretations. This is a positive case. During, I don't remember anymore which natural disaster, people started thinking that Airbnb could be actually a nice platform to provide access of shelter to people that were displaced. And immediately the platform jumped on it and jumped on the change of intent of the platform. So people were able to put their homes at disposal of people that had lost their house. And this is, for example, a nice example of how the same platform can be shifted for another intent. How can we bring openness also to our design process? I came to hate Persona for many different reasons, but I was really pleased when I found actually two amazing designers that I actually know inventing this tool called mindsets. So the idea is that you don't describe anymore the age or elements that are actually not relevant for the interaction with the product, but that you actually describe more like what mindset is that person in the moment that interacts or she interacts with the product or service. And for a service or a product, a person can even go through different mindsets. So at the beginning, they did it for a bank product and a loan, which is often something that takes a bit of time to set up, and the person or the user was actually going through very different mindsets before actually getting the loan. This is also a reference from Naman, a place I used to work. They actually developed what they called paradox cards. The idea is that you have cards with a lot of different antithetical paradoxes, and when you try to brainstorm, you actually try to comply to both. So for example, how can I design a solution that is open and closed at the same time? And there you brainstorm together with your team and you say, okay, maybe there are some aspects that are easy to access, but some aspects that are protected. And by doing that, you allow the openness of and the change of intent within your product. The last one is a bit cheating because it's not really poetry, but is actually poetry combined with music, which is polyphony. I got to know that in Flanders there was a history on polyphony as well. And what I liked is the idea of combining several independent voices, which at the end basically make one unique sound or harmony. And I also got to know that when people were singing polyphony, they were not only singing their own note and singing, but they were also singing all the notes and the partiture of all the other people in the choir. And I found that really beautiful because it's a way of being aware that your voice is not the only one, and you are fully aware of what the other voices are singing as well. There as well, I thought, what can we apply in the design process or in the products we use? And then I found this really nice website. They designed period underwear, but on their website there is also men and women. And I like this idea that you make, by doing that, you make also other people aware that not only women menstruate, there are also men who menstruate because they have gone through a transition. A bit in the same wave, I like the idea that a person has, of course, an official identity, but can use the products playing a bit also with different identities. And when we make it too strict or too unilateral, that doesn't allow experimentation or polyphony. So in the case of Uber, for example, this was a complaint that a user filed because, again, during a transition, they were still using their dead name in the official well, in the app and in the notifications. So there you would see the picture of the person that has already transitioned, but see also his dead name in it, which of course was not great. How can we bring more polyphony when we design and during the design process? Here I also found a very nice tool called the Inclusive Panda. It's basically a sort of a checklist of things that you could think of when designing a product. And namely is like, okay, with my full set of participants and with or users, with my target group, and within that target group, who is included, but also who is excluded? Who am I excluding from the design process, intentionally or unintentionally? And what is the potential harm that I'm doing by including or excluding that target group? It's just a way of thinking about, okay, I have probably met a couple of users, but is there a group or a minority or a category that I'm excluding either intentionally or unintentionally? And I mean, I think we face a bit the same problem as other industries. This is a quote from actually AI, but I think it's relevant also for design. In most of the design teams we work, we are a lot of white people and a lot of white men, and that doesn't really help the polyphony already inside the design team. So also there, the more diverse is your team, the richer is your perspective already within your team. The last aspect of poetry, which I really like, is every word is carefully chosen. And the term elegance comes from Latin eligere, which means choose carefully. So I really like this concept of doing things with a really intentional, in a really intentional way. So not only the product you design, but also the process you apply, how much of that is intentional, how much of that you have put intent in it, in designing something that fits with your values. And again, when we look at the matrix or the sort of checks that we test ourselves against or that we use to assess our job, often is profitability, engagement, conversion. But I wonder if we would be more intentional about it. Would we use the same? If we would rather score ourselves in terms of equality, inclusion, sustainability, well-being, how different would be the design that we would do? The conference I participated to with this talk had as theme hope, and so it was also really nice that the acronyms of course it's a bit intentional, right? The acronym of this thing is also hope, because my message would want to be also a very hopeful message. I don't think everything is broken, and I don't think at the conference I was last week, they actually said something very beautiful. The system might be broken, but the people are not. And I do believe that. I do believe that people are not broken, and that we should always try to make our best to make the world a little bit better every time. And I would like to leave with this quote, which I really like, of Thomas Wendt, which is a theoretical designer, if I can call it like that. A sustainable future hinges on design practitioners' ability to choose which futures are preferable. What we introduce into the world will always have social, cultural, and ethical consequences. Thank you.
So we're going to have a short technical break if anybody needs it.
Questions?
Or questions.
If they have questions.
Yeah. Anyone has any questions? Don't be shy.
I was too philosophical.
Yeah. Oh.
Thanks for the talk. Really interesting and yeah, gives a hope actually. I have a question about, so it's a lot of the designer's role to take care of what he brings into the world. How can you apply that in more of a industry enterprise context? How can you fight back against business that has the hard metrics?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's something that I struggle also often with. I think one thing we have the power to do is definitely bringing up insights through design research that are indeed more polyphonic. So when we are asked to do research, are we actually doing research with the target group that is diverse enough, or with needs and perspectives that are diverse enough? I think that's the first thing that we can actionably do. The other thing is also like, I don't know if you ever worked with the system thinking or system maps, but they are very complex to show to your management, but they also show what potentially the consequences of what you are building are. So for example, I saw once a system map that showed that by delivering a specific service that would open little it was something to open little warehouses instead of a big warehouse in the center of the city to have easier access to goods. But they showed with the system map that by doing that, they would have impacted very much and drastically the local economy, because smaller shops would have closed because they would have taken the space of smaller shops. And then, of course, if you don't have a smaller shop in your neighborhood kind of decreases the value. So they actually showed the systemic impact of that, which is of course like very difficult to assess sometimes, but I think it's also another tool that we have, visualizing things and making things clear to eventually have management take the possibly right or better decision.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Thanks. At one point in your talk, I love the ideology of the fact that you were like, okay, maybe we should rethink about using personas, that is kind of putting people in tons of little boxes.
Yeah.
I was just wondering for some more practicalities. I was just thinking, for example, okay, I'm a bit tech savvy, or do I have time, or I don't have time? You know, those elements.
Yeah.
If you work a bit on the state of mind they are when approaching the product, how you could a bit, in a way, try to avoid to put them in a box.
Yeah.
And in another, also try to fit the reality they are in at the moment.
Yeah. So what you're saying is indeed, I think mindsets, what they miss is the contextual aspect, because indeed you have less information about maybe skills or contextuality. What I used in the past also sometimes to avoid persona is also simply archetypes. So instead of defining, basically simply avoiding the age, she is a woman, she has a kid, and really focusing on the tech savvy indeed, or the lazy. Like I saw a project for a sport app, and they had as an archetype the couch potato, and then you immediately know what they mean, you know, but it's not like defined by age, gender, or other like characteristics that would fall into stereotypes. So I sometimes also use that when I need more contextual
Love the idea of the image. So.
Any other questions? Yep. Okay.
Today, I mean, you can easily ask ChatGPT to create personas. So it's often going to give you personas based on the data we know. And like you just said in your talk as well, it's going to be very biased already. How do we cope with that? How do you see that evolve towards the future?
Yeah, ChatGPT, right? I avoid using ChatGPT also for environmental reasons, because I know that any query consumes tons of computing power and water. But also for the outputs, I think at the end of the day, as a professionist, you just stay very critical about the output of these machines, and also, like you said, verify the data that gets inputted in the AI, because AI is just very good at biases because we are good at biases, and we feed AI with like a wrong data set. I remember I read once that the first data set that they used for the image recognition of people was Yahoo News. And of course, in Yahoo News, there were a lot of, again, white male, and the most recognized face was Bush, because he appeared a lot in Yahoo News. For example, if you Googled also some time ago CEO, you would have only white men, because the data set was basically only white men. So also there, I think AI is a very powerful tool, but the quality of the data is extremely important. So what I would do personally is just make sure that the research that ChatGPT access to is fair enough, or the data set is good enough, and then I would just be very critical with the output that it gives. Yeah.
Because I mean, that's a big topic today, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, we see both worlds. We know both worlds, to say it this way.
Yeah.
But the generations that are coming don't. So it's a task of designers then to feed it also the right data from the start and say, no, this is not good, this is good.
Yeah, I mean, you would always, ideally you do personas with ChatGPT by feeding research that you've done yourself, no, or with a team. So the data you input is also quite important. So as long as that is qualitative, I hope that ChatGPT is gonna make a decent output out of it. Yeah.
Right.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm not a designer, so thanks for the talk and introduction to your world. I'm very fascinated by the idea to change the world through design. And I'm wondering how much support you get from the agile community in the corporate world. Because to me, changing the world goes through OKRs, which are toward changing something, having an impact positively in the world.
Yeah.
And that's a bit the same question, like in the corporate world, how do you get support from people to meet your mission to change the world through design?
You are basically, I left the corporate world for that reason. I personally found it very difficult. Yeah, I think the key maybe there is not to substitute, because when I showed like not to substitute those, but to add this a bit on the side and see, okay, of course we need to be profitable, that makes perfect sense for an organization, but can we also be equal and inclusive? And that's
you left the
corporate.
Okay. Thank you.
But I think, as I said before, I think visualizing needs, making needs visible also to C-level, or allowing also these sort of objectives to come up in a discussion, that's already, a small step.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just have a question, a follow-up question on this. You say you left the corporate world, but now you work for Digitaal Vlaanderen, the government, right? Do you feel like it's better? Do you feel like you get more chances to include this there?
First of all, the nature of the products we do is most of the time services for citizens, and by default they need to be accessible to everyone. And so there is, of course, an aspect of the core of the business that is completely different. And I think the fact that it's not something that needs to make profit also has a huge impact on the way we design things. For example, we are also able to say, no, this thing is not worth the investment, we just cut it, which is thing that I found in the corporate world were a bit less difficult, or at least in the where I was working before, because there is this sort of, okay, this is public money, we should spend it wisely, so we don't build things for the sake of building. Which is an approach, instead of just saying, we build, we try, even if it doesn't work, it's fine, but because it's public money, of course you need to be much more careful about the intentionality and the usefulness of what you're building. So yeah, I think it's a different framework and setup that allows indeed more of this to already be present there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
A short break, 5-10 minutes, to get Daniel's talk ready. So go and grab yourself a drink, some nibbles, technical break, and come back soon, please. So now I introduce to you Daniel. So he's going to talk about learnings from an international journey, and he is going to give a bit more of an introduction to himself. So I'll let you talk.
Thank you. All right. So yeah, same topic, different angle. I'm gonna pass the quick introduction, and sorry for the picture. I feel a bit faded. Just to give you a quick overview of my background, I spent like almost more than 20 years in different fields through marketing agency, from art director, designer, and then UX strategy, different level, focusing historically on communication experience, then on brand strategy, brand identity, and progressively more and more on the product side. Couple key clients I worked for, or I had the chance to work for, some based in Europe, some based in US. I'll go through some use case at some point regarding my journey. A quick snap of some key project I used to do. This is probably the entry point of my story. A lot of countries from this experience, most of them related to my work experience. I started in Paris for almost 10 years, and I started to evolve in Europe for 3 years, then 7 years in the US, and then back in Paris, and freshly in Brussels since 3 months now. So yeah, a lot of experience. Yeah, the point is not to talk about my jet lag experience. That could be another topics. The point is to talk about, in general, industry, what we are doing in common, innovation, product experience, and the key aspect to achieve it, which is our main topic, the communication. I think the interesting paradox for me is most of us struggle at it. especially designer, UX profile, developer in general. In fact, most of them are introverts. It's not our nature to communicate efficiently. And it's also my struggle when I started. It's still, to be honest. I think I find a way to unlock some key elements, key aspect of the communication, and it's typically what I wanted to share. It's closely related to my international journey. It helped me to refocus on what matters, and it's where I'm gonna go. Back in my first experience in Paris, the truth is, yeah, I wasn't good in communication. I struggled. I thought I was good, then I realized I wasn't, because I was doing like most of the people, hiding behind, you know, marketing jargons and all the technical bullshit we can have in agency or product company. Also, I wasn't fluent. And as a French person, it's a struggle. Most of us struggle, you know, in English and other language. It creates a lot of anxiety for me. It just makes my communication even worse in general. When I say communication in a very large way, and when I started to discover Europe and challenge the barrier language, what I realized is, well, actually, it's not a blocker. I was still shitty in English, you know, it was terrible, but I realized it was a strength, and it's really where I want to focus for some people who come from same environment, designer, everybody who is struggling in general with communication. It's, on my side, it helped me to realize, well, I have to focus on what matters because I'm limited, you know. I can't speak fluently. I have to use 20% of my language to convince people, and I was at this stage in a pretty high position, so it was a real struggle for me, which is the key point of this story. It's like, all this experience helped me to improve my verbal and visual communication in general, both because, of course, you're limited where you're not fluent. There is so many gaps, not only the barrier language, the cultural barrier as well. And it forces you to adapt. It forces you to understand your audience in general, and be focused on all the cultural aspects. And most of the time we forget about it when we are in our country because we are used to have this facility, you know, talking the same language, talking about the same reference, and we are not necessarily aware of who we have in front of us. So I think what is the most interesting for me when I travel is to realize, oh, it's important to be aware of that. And I realized with even the most simple vocabulary, I was able to convince people. The second one is the visual communication, because when you're limited with your own language, when you're not fluent, you have to compensate. And to compensate, you have basically to make the work speak for itself. And it forced me to improve also my work on how it's intuitive or it's obvious without large explanation. And I'm referencing, like, again, a large field of project. I'll share a couple of them. From a design standpoint, it's probably more obvious, but also from a UX or a strategy aspect. I'm gonna share a couple of use cases. This is an interesting one. I was in the US like since a year ago, again, still not fully fluent. I was leading IBM Watson. For those who don't know IBM Watson, it's the AI tool for IBM. It was in 2020, so people were not still aware of what is AI and what are the capabilities. I was discussing with the marketing team at this stage at IBM Watson, and they were struggling on how to demonstrate the capability. They were debating, trying to find different angle, and again, I was limited with my English, and I just started to say, well, okay, let's meet Watson. People don't know what it is. It's difficult because it's so much possibilities. So let's incarnate what is Watson. And from this simple idea, we started to build an event for Think 2020 at this stage. It's at the headquarters in San Francisco. And we started to build an experience with different personae, trying to achieve different solutions depending the audience for large company, building like really simple experience that speak for itself. Another interesting use case regarding how to manage your audience is Kasparov chess. Total different scenario here. I was working for Vivendi with major capital in Paris who own like games and media and different stuff. They were trying to convince Garry Kasparov, who is one of the main chess player in the world, who beat, by the way, IBM AI at first, and then he got beaten. It was interesting because they were trying to convince him to sign this project, which is a learning experience on chess with masterclass, with gaming experience, with ton of stuff. And he was saying no since more than a year, and they started to involve me inside the project, and I started to dig into this fascinating person, you know, and trying to understand like how he think. And I realized actually he's probably one of the smartest dude on the planet, but he's also very emotional. And I find this angle to play with that. I started to build an identity for him, a logo that reflects its culture, his game, and a full identity that reflects the guy. And at the end, we find a way to sell a full experience with him, and we sign just like that. Another different scenario here is Dolby. Dolby is, I don't know if you know them. They are major industry that provide sound and sight for cinema industry and others. I think the main struggle for them was the brand perception. They are very good at what they are doing. They work with artists, but they are perceived as engineer. And they wanted to make a shift on this perception and demonstrate how they are creative through their technology. So the simple idea here was to use this logo. It was a rebrand of Dolby back in 2021. And we say, well, you have the technology, you have the artist who work with your technology. Artists know the technology, but the audience don't know the technology or your perception working with the artist. So let's use the logo as a canvas to express creativity with all the talent you work with. And from that, we just simply created an exhibition that showcases, you know, the creativity of all the artists who work with Dolby, not only in video, but also in sound. It's difficult to showcase it here. But that's for me another example on how this experience for me to refocus on always the most simple idea. And it's so far where I really succeeded. The last one is Hermes. Hermes is interesting because they're the leader today of the luxury industry, and they're very traditional digitally. I mean, they don't have the maturity. The only thing they know is the physical store, the retail. So we are looking to find an angle to convince them to sell the experience and make sure they can understand like the full e-commerce strategy. I was at this stage, you know, leading the UX department and the design department. And we came back with the simple idea of illustrate, you know, the parallel between the physical store, what they know, and how we translate it in digital. And that's how we succeed. The experience like get richer and richer. We worked with them for almost 5 years, to be honest. That's one of my best case study. What I'm trying to summarize at the end is, yeah, we're all experts, no matter, you know, the specific industry, UX, developer, whatever. What I realized, and it's interesting because I realized that also when I came back in Brussels, sorry. We tend too often to speak for ourselves, to ourselves. We get lost in translation most of the time, and we forgot our audience. And I think my journey in all these countries helped me to refocus on that, to understand, well, it's not that easy. I think currently we know what it is at BPOS. You know, it's a struggle because as experts you tend to get lost in translation, and most of our audience is, well, people who don't have the digital maturity. So the ability to understand it and to make it simple for them is the essence for me. We get also lost in technical dependencies or complexity, and that's always the risk. And for me, it's just a reminder to ensure we stay focused on these two pillars, the simplicity and the quality of work. This experience is for me just a good reminder, no matter where I go, where I stand. It's just, yeah, it's not that easy. It's the fuel. If I have to summarize it, again, it's really to adapt to your audience. It's removing all the jargon. I think metaphor in general is great for people who don't understand digital. For you, it's really to keep the focus on the essence, and we get lost most of the time, again, due to so many aspects. And at the end, it's really the work that should speak for itself. That sounds easy, but I think it's what makes me succeed in general on most of the project. Thank you. Just a quick note on some food for mind. If you're interested on the subject regarding, you know, multicultural management, learning how to reach and understand different culture, there is like a couple of interesting books that are part of my library. Some of them are more related here to the thinking and how you stay focused on the essence of a concept. Feel free to reach to me if you're interested in. And voila. Say it again.
There is a book called Metaphors We Live By.
Mm-hmm.
Roland Barthes. It's fantastic.
Never read, but yeah, I'm interested.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was really, really insightful. Does anybody have any questions? Yay, that was quick.
So thanks a lot for sharing your also vulnerability. I now work in a context where I don't have I don't master the language as I wish I would. I don't master Dutch as much as I master English. And I find difficult the balance between visualizing and adding the explanation and words. I was wondering, what is your, like, do you have a right balance? How much is like visualization taking away words, and how much words are complementary to visualization? What is your experience there?
Well, it really depends the context. Again, like when you're evolving on visual design or concepts, obviously the visual part is more obvious. But what I realize when I evolve on UX or even strategy is also the importance of visual and efficiency of visual. And I think it's where in general we are not put enough attention to detail. In strategy, like, it's so easy to get lost into data analytics. The way to present them in a very intelligible way is a challenge, and it's where I started to really invest in data visualization at this time, and make it compelling, make it intuitive, because again, depending your audience, it's not easy to read between the lines and into this complex graphic. I could have shared like more case study. These one are a balance of design, concept, experience, and experience. But yeah, I have the same, you know, on more boring slide that show more pragmatical information. And I think the key point for me is always to ensure we take care of it. We give some love to any representation, any visualization.
Hi. Would you have an example of something we should not say? And for example, in the presentation, something you've heard that you would call that's some bullshit, for example. And what would you say instead? Do you have an example in mind, maybe? Something you've probably heard in your younger years.
I think what took me a while is to accept to say I don't know to a client. I don't know if it replied directly to your question, but it asked a lot of courage to do that. And I think since I really shift into my mindset in terms of communication, and it's just to be transparent with the client. You don't have necessarily the immediate answer, but what I stopped to do is the bullshit, because it's not working anymore. And I think the client maturity evolved also a lot since the 80s, you know. So I think now you can play that game.
And do you have an example, for example? Yeah.
I don't have specific example, but no, I don't have it.
It's okay. It's
maybe first thing that came to mind, more for the fun fact, but you were mentioning the fact that you struggled in English or any other foreign language. And it was funny because once I was talking to my wife, which is also not a French native, she have no accent. When you can hear her, like, whoa, it's like native. And say, no, it's even worse. Having an accent does help, because when I don't understand, people just think I'm dumb. So I do think that having an accent, in fact, could save your ass. But more seriously, you worked for this chess player, and in a way, you wanted to incarnate him represent the unicity of one individual or something like that. If I
Yeah,
understood well.
more than that, I knew this guy had a lot of ego. So I was also playing with this part,
Okay,
and
yeah.
that's how I shifted it.
That's a good spot. But you also worked for large brands who have like a presence worldwide. And for example, if you are, I don't know, if you're in China or South Arabia or in Brussels, you might look at a product a bit differently. You look at the branding with different expectation and so on. And I understand if you Nike, you Nike. So in a way, you have a way, but if you start
I
a
work for
brand,
Nike, so
yeah.
I know them, and they're probably the most mature with Airbnb, I will say, in terms of strategy of localization, strategy of content and adaptation to every market. So
And how do they adapt then when they think about a new product or even a new experience to make it that duplicable? Is that speaking to everyone?
because
knowing
it's just a matter of methodology, from my understanding. You start with your main market, US, and then you identify patterns that can be replicated on other market and which one you have to adapt to local market. And most of the time it's that, in terms of like Nike, I was less on the product, but on the communication, it's like you have 30-40% that is the main communication in the US, and then you adapt specificities.
And so those big brands always start to speak to the main market. So let's say if we start from scratch a brand and we target the word basically, it means that we would have to assume that might be our main market before designing.
Well, before targeting the world, you have to make a launch strategy, and you have to start somewhere. You can start everywhere. So you test the main market, and then you expand with the subtleties.
When I was studying in Delft, they actually... Sorry. When I was studying in Delft, they actually had a course called internationalization. And what they taught was basically, there was apparently this guy called Hofstede who worked for IBM for I don't know how long. And he basically came up with some sort of parameters for assessing different cultures. So there are cultures that in the communication, they are much more indirect. So they don't say, for example, in Japan or in China, they would never say no to you, but they would just come up with a very convoluted way to say that they can't do it, right? The same way, for example, in Japan, you can't talk to a person that is higher in hierarchy than you. So all these kind of aspects, they influence the communication. And though they showed, for example, that McDonald's, they have, the products is the same, but they have completely different websites according to the country. And for example, in Asia, they have much more visuals and less, less text. And there is a completely different way of communicating about exactly the same product. So they really tailor the communication strategy to the parameters of the culture that they are addressing.
It's another level. From my experience, Airbnb is probably the most impressive on that, because they adapt everything to the market. Like the tone of voice, like you mentioned, the brand voice is still kind of consistent, but the adaptation of the tone of voice varies to any market. All the contents in terms of inclusion, the representation of culture. So if you're in France or in Brussels or in India, you will see everything is really in place and tailored to the culture, which is fascinating, but it requires fucking massive budget.
And they do that on their communication or on their product? Or
both? Both. And it's just the level of ultimate level of maturity for me. At Bpost, we have a huge challenge now, but it's interesting to be aware of this aspect. I think it's an interesting opportunity for Bpost, because as an institution, you have to cover 4 languages for culture in a way, and right now it's just flat, you know, in terms of, so there is a lot of work regarding that.
If I may add something, I'm also a French native, and when I arrived in Belgium a long time ago, I'm even more Belgian than French almost, I noticed that the same things you mentioned between different cultures and countries, it's the same in Belgium on a very more granular level. And when you're French and you arrive, you just discover it in a very strange way, because you do not sell things the same way to the Dutch-speaking people than to the French-speaking people. And this is something I discovered at the beginning of my career as a copywriter. I know I'm not a UX writer, but some concepts, they're just not translatable. Or some ideas that the Dutch people had in a former client, they wouldn't work in French. I remember an example, and it was a client selling insurance, and they were selling an insurance for your house. And they were using as, you know, the first sentence, like, raising a child is more expensive than buying your first house. And, well, it was cool. And the Dutch, it performed very well on user tests for the Dutch target. But when we made several translation a bit like, well, it's direct. We tested it, and it didn't perform very well with the French audience because they found it too confronting, that speaking about their kids, their money for like an insurance product. So you do not really sell things the same way to the Dutch speakers and the French.
That's all the challenge in terms of copy and France. No, it's not about translating; it's about rewriting.
Yes, and so
that's a whole different exercise.
In Belgium, you don't do translation; you have to do transcreation.
You have
from
to
the
adapt
start.
to the culture. It's way more than just a ChatGPT translation.
But translations in general is like. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, someone is.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. So my question is related to the cultural aspect of your journey, which is tremendous and amazing. So congrats.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, circling back to the question about Airbnb, you mentioned they also have an amazing way of collecting data to adapt to cultural context and so on. How do they get there? Just relying on people like you? Or do they have some systems to really learn and collect data and so on?
I don't have the full answer on that, because my experience with Airbnb was mostly as a design director, so I was less involved on the research and all the data aspects. I guess they have tons of data to rely on that, and they have also specific agency for each market. So that's how they get tailored to each of them.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Because you mentioned your skill evolve, yeah, and you were starting from not being very good at this. Then you learn. What helped you, apart from reading all these books? Where is there a technique or?
No, it's practice. It's experience. It's really where I recommend ideally anyone to travel and experience different culture, because that's really a big shift of mindset. It at least for me, it completely changed my way of understanding people, culture, and it impacted so much my work. Especially as a French, like it's a which is so centered on his own culture. You know, it was a big shift for me. So but it's mostly practice and experience of different people, different culture, different way of working that force you to adapt. And at the end, this ability to adapt is for me the answer. Is like you're a chameleon in a way. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah. Oh.
A lot of questions.
First, it's not really a question, just sharing the fact that it resonated me a lot what you said, because as you heard, my English is not super nice also, and I was struggling a lot in a lot of meeting also, trying to pass my idea pretty well. I'm sure I'm really better in French than in English. So, but I still have a question. Actually, two questions. I'm wondering if you have some routines before a meeting. I'm sure that preparing a lot more your presentation is one of your routine, because I think it's really important. But maybe you have other routines, like maybe think about something just before a meeting for being more cool before that. And second one, do you think that maybe technology can maybe help us on those kind of stuff, of issues, like maybe live translation or stuff like that on a big meeting where different languages are on the table?
Got it. So on the first question, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a hard worker. I work like crazy I test all the time. I share also my presentation to anybody, and mostly people who are not in the industry, because it forced me to ensure they can at least have an understanding the way I simplify it. I love to do this exercise in general. I don't have all the time the opportunity to do it, but I also keep a space for improvisation. I think it's crucial, otherwise you're stuck into the flow of your presentation and your thinking. So I repeat, I test a lot my presentation. And again, there is so much work in general inside my presentation, because one of the key aspect I mentioned is the work should speak for itself. So it's not just structure and way to articulate a story or a presentation. It's but on the other hand, for sure, you need to detach from this also to have more spontaneity in general.
Yeah, but when you speak about improvisation, it's hard to improvise in another language than your mother language. And
it's hard, and you're right. Like in the US, my ability to play with humor or subtleties are not the same. It's way more straightforward. But in that case, it's where you compensate with the visual communication. It's like you're kind of limited on what you're saying in English, so you play a sense of humor differently, through visuals, through it could be smiley, it could be the way to play with your presentation. It's always finding a way to compensate where you're limited. But yeah.
And for the technology, you think it can be something that we can use for because I was, for example, working on a bank where on the table we have some Dutch people, English people, or other country language people also, and the rules was to speak our own language, at least. Maybe the rest of the audience doesn't understand always, but it was helping me to pass my ideas pretty well also, because you're right, and I'm sure it's the best way to do it, is to simplify the things and the way you explain it. But at the end, it's the product which is super important, but don't forget that we are also sellers, and yeah, you have to improvise, or you have to speak or to sell something, and on another language it's not always as easy as on my.
It's not easy. I think like I worked for WebEx. I don't know if you know the platform. They were challenged by Zoom during the pandemic, and it's where I had the opportunity to do a full rebranding, not only on the logo but also the experience. An interesting thing is they were pioneer in translating video conference and summarizing it and generate like I don't know many variation depending language, and I think it's great tools, but at some point it's
miss maybe the interaction, the direct interaction with the people, or
it's
something else.
It's more than translating when you're selling an ID. It's
the
emotional connection.
Sure.
It's like it's way more than that. And from my experience, I think it's better to be limited with your own vocabulary, but do the effort
and with a bad accent
and look in your eyes,
as you said,
than playing transcription.
Yeah.
I think it's evolving so fast. They are getting better and better, and I don't think they are ready for sure and for a long time before to do proper rewriting, like we mentioned. But on some cases, they are great companions. But it's really about the context for me. If you're in a meeting selling to a key stakeholder, I will not do that.
Yeah.
I will do with what I have.
Sure. Thanks for sharing that.
Maybe one more question.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Dan, for sharing your journey. Very nice to hear. You've traveled a lot of places, and you share that you have developed an ability to adapt in each of these culture, and all of these experiences have probably shaped the person you are today. Can you name a few takeaways you have taken from each culture as a design professional, I mean?
Sure. It's always tough because I don't want to beat on any culture, but I think in UK it was very challenging for me. It was the first jump into a different culture and language, and in this industry they're tough. And when you struggle, they don't care. They play with it. But it's also an historical game between French and Brit. So I learned in the hard way. That's the first takeaway in the UK. I think then I jump on to different culture. Like in Amsterdam, it was interesting regarding the communication aspect we mentioned, because I was leading some key luxury brand like Chanel or Hermes on Paris office side, and I was supervising UX team, and the development was also in Amsterdam, so more focus on the experience on the other side. What was difficult here is the cultural gap between French and Dutch. There is no sense of second degrees in terms of humor, and I discovered that. My client discovered that as well. When they don't like you, they say it in front of you. So that was a shock for me. I was not prepared for that. I think then in Berlin or Munich, I didn't mention Munich. I had a couple experience in Munich. It's I was impressed obviously by some of the cliche, the the structure, the methodology, but I don't know. It was kind of a next step of, and I'm glad I went through Amsterdam at first, because it was gradually a deep experience into a total different culture. So it was, yeah, a huge cultural gap. Socially, I stay 8 months, and it was very difficult for me. And I'm all from Brittany, and my dad is also a German dude, but I'm so disconnected to the culture. Then I came back in Paris, and then I traveled in the US. What is interesting is US was in a way so familiar to me, and it was also so far familiar, because we're all evolved since we are kids into this culture. There is obviously some gaps, especially in the West Coast. The cultural gap are very different from New York, or the slang, everything. But what was fascinating is the ability to accept people from so many backgrounds. They have naturally this ability to adapt on purpose, because obviously you bring a lot of value for them. But I was fascinated by some of the key clients I experienced here, and I was at some of the biggest job in my career. I was at an executive level, working with, CEOs and for Audi, for so many brands. And yeah, it's really where I realized, the language was not a blocker. They were listening, and I was so slow. But I make it, and they allow me to make it. So it's what I will retain probably the most from this culture. They're smart, because they know no matter what, it's valuable. So they don't have préjugés, and I think it's really fascinating for me, compared to my culture.
Thank you.
Thanks to you guys.
Thank you everybody for coming, and thank you very much, Clementina and Daniel. I just want to say it's two very different talks, but two equally as interesting. And I think the number of questions from the audience for both talks is a testament to your presentation. So thank you very much.